I just want to welcome the one and only Stanley Cohen. He has represented Hamas. He has represented Hezbollah, a Jewish American lawyer who stands for freedom, justice, and integrity. Thank you so much for taking your time out to join us, Stanley. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm doing well. Thank you for your invitation. It's a great show, and I'm honored to participate.
The honor is ours, Stanley. The honor is ours, and we always appreciate the conversation we get with you. So, Stanley, I just want to get straight into the conversation. You are a legal expert. You've advised Hamas and Hezbollah. We're right in the midst of negotiations. As a lawyer, as someone who may have been part of negotiations in the past, what would be some of the things you would be advising in this situation? Iran, possibly Hezbollah, they're dealing this, basically negotiating with the United States of America and Israel.
I would be advising them first and foremost that at best, Donald Trump is a liar. At worst, he's insane. At super worst, he's both. That he is surrounded by sycophants that are in over their head. They are clueless about the region. They are clueless about, I mean, you've got Jared Kushner going to meetings carrying empty duffel bags, coming back with duffel bags filled with whatever one can assume. I would advise, yes, I have advised in negotiations before of all sorts over the years. The problem is when you go into the negotiations with the United States and with Israel, I mean, talk about a diseased negotiation process. I would advise my clients, A, not to accept anything as truthful from the other side, B, that nothing would stay more than the mouthpiece that speaks of it, and C, to demand that there have to be the party you're negotiating with has to accede to certain demands and back it up with proof, back it up with existence. For example, there's discussions about exchange of huge amounts of money stolen by Israel and by the United States from Iran. Okay, if Donald Trump says, I'm willing to give you $20 billion, that's your money to release it, or $100 billion, I would demand that the money be placed in an escrow account that's not controlled by Donald Trump, that's not controlled by Israel, but by a third party that's bound by a contractual relationship. If Donald Trump or Israel promised that they would do X or Y or Z, I would demand that there'd be $1 billion, $100 billion also placed into an escrow account that says if there's a breach, that the money goes to the other side. I would, under no circumstances, agree to any nonsense about disarming. Under no circumstances would I agree to. You see, look, Donald Trump is about deflection. Israel is about desperation at this point. Israel's down to about 6 countries in the world that believe them and support them right now. Netanyahu apparently has just survived cancer. The cancer in Israel is Israeli Jews, is the far right. They're both desperate to earn. Netanyahu is desperate to stay out of prison. He's got that court case that's still going on. Trump is desperate. It's from deflection, whether it's ICE, whether it's Epstein, whether it's the economy, whether it's his dementia, whether it's falling asleep in meetings. They are both looking to deflect. And that's fine if you want to deflect. But if I were advising people involved on the other side, I would make sure that there were independent escrow accounts set up on all sorts of grounds that were not controlled by the United States or Israel. When it comes to Lebanon, I'm glad that the president of Lebanon enjoys kosher cooking and comes to Washington, D.C. to bite it. But it's ridiculous. We've had a situation when it comes to Lebanon where Israel was engaged in genocide 20 years ago. You had one of the most horrific torture centers I've been to it ever that Israel eventually bombed out. Israel would be required to remove themselves completely 100% from the south. Israel would be required to also place various aspects into escrow accounts. The notion that Iran has to unilaterally surrender or allow Donald Trump to continue pounding and saying it's a surrender is absurd. Iran is winning. And I understand there are people on the ground and expat Iranians that are not happy, which was a trigger. The fact of the matter is, under international law, what Israel is doing, what Donald Trump is doing, violates a half dozen different core values of international law. It violates domestic law in the United States. There's no leave by Congress to continue. Congress can freeze the fundings. So while there are many people on the outside looking in saying, oh, Donald Trump has won and look what's going on, Donald Trump thinks the Straits of Hormuz is basically a Wall Street investment. That's how he looks at it. The economy is a disaster in the United States. Trump is running from it. So if I were advising the other side, dealing with Israel or the United States, more so than ever, I would say, one, don't believe a word they're saying. Two, you got to have corroboration for what they're saying. Three, you have to have escrow accounts, which are controlled or overseen by neutral bodies under international law on a basically a bargain for exchange, a contract. And four, you have to have a reality taste. The problem's going to be if you're Iran or if you're Hezbollah, and you hear the stupidity, the lies, the disingenuous nonsense that's going to come out from Israel and from the United States, the tendency is not to allow it to go unresolved or unanswered. Let the United States rave, let them scream, let Israel rave and scream. At day's end, both Hezbollah and Iran are in a position to not just close this out with a victory on many levels, but to guarantee whatever they agree to is covered under international law.
So first of all, our heartfelt condolences to the cancer that has to deal with Netanyahu. But that being said, in terms of what you said, so just to clearly understand what you're saying, the money you put in the escrow account isn't solely for the unfreezed asset, but it's for each component of the deal. So let's say there was a conversation about the nuclear enrichment. If Trump was to breach that, or the Israelis was to breach that, that money would automatically be released.
Yes, that would be over and above monies that have been sanctioned or seized by Iran.
Okay,
That's in a separate account. There would be an escrow account that if the United States, every time the United States or Israel did another bombing like they do in Gaza every day, every time they murdered another journalist, which they do in Gaza and in Iran every single day, or in Lebanon every day, this escrow account would be a breach, would go to Iran, would go to Hezbollah, which would be interesting because then you can indict the United States government for, I guess, material support of terrorism because they're continuing to fund organizations that they claim are terrorists. But that's what bargain for exchanges are. You have to maximize your leverage. You have to play it out. But most important, you have to go into negotiations with open eyes. Open eyes here says, if you shake hands with either Netanyahu or Trump, when you walk away, count your fingers.
True story. But Stanley, so another question, I guess, forgive my ignorance if this doesn't make sense, but if you were to put this money in an escrow account, what it means is, for example, any breach would cause X amount of money to go to Iran. Could the Americans like somehow freeze it? Like Trump just has, if you remember with the Maduro, the what we're hearing from intelligence is that the bodyguard and the driver are the ones who sold him out for money, and then Trump didn't pay them. And so what I'm saying is there a way where this happens automatically and he doesn't freeze it? Like he knows how to sanction and freeze things, right?
Well, no, the essence of an escrow account is you have, whether it's $1 or $1 trillion, it's placed into an account that neither party controls. The account is controlled and dictated by the terms of what established the account. You have an independent body, whether it's a group of 6 nations or 12 nations, that cannot be controlled, that cannot be purchased, it cannot be intimidated, it cannot be bullied, and neither side can just unilaterally withdraw the money from the account. It's very much like an escrow account during civil litigation that says, okay, it's there because it gives insurance as to the negotiations as they proceed. It's funny. Kushner gets up there and says, the other day, I had to laugh. Someone asked him, well, you have absolutely no experience in international law. What are you doing here? And he said, it's no different than business. Okay, if it's no different than business, every single day in businesses all over the world, escrow accounts are set up to ensure agreements, to assure that the terms and conditions are met, and where and when there's a violation, there's a penalty imposed. That's what needs to be done. And it may be done quietly. You can also do this in a way where it's not publicized, but implicit in an agreement is if breach 1, 2, or 3, X amount of money goes over. Now, I understand there are people sitting there talking, saying, this is not about money. It's about human rights. It's about international law. It's about humanity. You're absolutely right. but you're dealing with predator war criminals. You're dealing with people that don't care about international law. And I'm talking specifically about the United States and Israel. Let us not forget Netanyahu is a war criminal. He's a fugitive. Israel's essentially been indicted for genocide already in Gaza and in the West Bank increasingly. So the reality of it is you don't need to play it up, but it can exist. It can be done. Trump likes to huff and puff and scream and lie and go from A to Z in between his naps at meetings and in the middle of the night when he's threatening the universe with, wiping out a complete culture and a history. But there is zero basis without two things. One is an escrow account, and two, there's another way you can go with the escrow account. You can have an independent source that has not just money, but has weaponry, which really is a deterrence. Okay, if you breach it, then Iran gets 10,000 bombs. If you breach it, these are just the things that you negotiate. But as Kushner said, it's about business. Okay, it's about business. And then escrow accounts is one way to go. There are other triggers for escrow accounts. There are captives that Israel has. There are captives that the United States has, both in the United States and overseas. There can be triggers for the release and exchange of prisoners. There are all sorts of negotiation points that can proceed. A problem when dealing with the United States and Israel is dishonesty, a lack of humanity, indifference to international law, and political exigence. Now, there are some who may say, I've just described Hezbollah, or I've just described Iran. The reality of it is, one has a proven track record of it. The other does not. One has a proven record of indifference to international law, of occupation, of funding genocide. The other one has a history of supporting resistance, of arming resistance groups, and of defending, in this place, when we're talking about Hezbollah, Lebanon. So the president of Lebanon can go to Washington and break bread all day long with Israel. At day's end, he does nothing. And the only one that's been supporting the right of self-determination and self-defense in Lebanon for decades has been Hezbollah.
Wow, that's so impressively explained. Now, another question I've got for you is, before we get into the specifics of the different aspects of the deal and the legal implications of it, is you advised Hezbollah in the past. Now, and I guess the question here is, it's Iran negotiating, but they essentially negotiate on behalf of Hezbollah as well. For example, the initial reports quite clearly state that there was meant to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. The Pakistanis admitted that there was meant to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. And what we heard is afterwards, JD Vance and Trump got a phone call from Netanyahu saying, pull out of the deal. And so they pulled Lebanon out of the deal. So I guess the question to you is, Iran's negotiating on behalf of essentially Hezbollah, but are they? This is what I'm asking you. Or is it Hezbollah had their own representatives? Were they in constant communication? You have experience with dealing with them, so if you can let us know.
Yeah, I can't imagine a national liberation movement, a national resistance movement. Yes, there's this incredibly deep and long relationship, obviously, between Iran and Hezbollah, but Iran is not going to make decisions in a vacuum. There is zero chance that Iran is engaged in negotiations with Israel and the United States, which do not involve discussions about Lebanon, which do not receive significant input from Hezbollah, and which ultimately are not going to provide Hezbollah with a veto, with the ability to engage and let its positions known. You've got thousands of Lebanese. There are areas. I've been to Beirut. I've been to South Lebanon. I've been to Beirut maybe a dozen times. The neighborhoods that have been exploded, have been bombed, that have been destroyed, are where there are apartments, where there are homes, where there are businesses, where there are restaurants. I've been to on numerous occasions. I would routinely go into those neighborhoods. I'd be dead right now. So the notion that a third party, for lack of a better word, an interlocutory vis-a-vis the negotiations as to Lebanon, would dictate and call the shots for what's going on in Lebanon, that's part of this supremacist notion that Iran controls Hamas, that Iran controls Hezbollah, that Iran controls the Houthis. Iran has obviously supported these resistance groups for decades. They've been a prime supporter. But the notion that they would control their decision making, that they would have the final say in the nature and extent of the resistance, is just more Western supremacist, racist nonsense.
So I guess from a more specific sense, how would they have been involved? I mean, I'm guessing they didn't have a representative in Islamabad, or would they have? Would it have been constant communication? Would it have been communication beforehand? The negotiation team, we've got Professor Miranda and a few people in there told me that they kind of already knew what the edict was, even specifically, they didn't have to call anyone in Iran as well. So I guess how would you have seen the kind of process occur?
Well, that's the same way that people talk one another on a regular basis. There's communications, be it by phone, be it by person, be it by messenger. There are ways. There's also ways. I've been involved in negotiations from afar where there's a checklist of 8, 10, 12 points. 5 you can't move on. 4 or 5 you can wiggle around, and 3 you can move on. There's nothing. That's standard negotiating. I've done it in criminal cases. I've done it in political cases. And I've worked on civil cases with other attorneys. That's the way it proceeds. The notion that Hezbollah is just sitting there with bated breath, waiting to be dictated the terms and conditions of an agreement which has removed them from the process, is just supremacist nonsense. The notion that Iran would turn around and say to a resistance group that has struggled for decades on behalf of the interests of Lebanon and on behalf of the interests of self-determination in the region, and simply say, jump or fetch, is absurd. You see, once again, it sort of reinforces or proposes or exalts this notion that Iran is a puppeteer, that it's this quote unquote terrorist puppeteer that tells Hezbollah what you do, that tells Hamas what you do, that tells the Houthis what you do, that tells everyone what to do. You've got to distinguish between a state, a country that supports armed struggle and national liberation of other groups in the region against the common enemy, but yet it doesn't dictate the nature and extent of it, has input, has discussions with it, but it's more of the Western, the global North in particular's arrogance that, oh no, people don't have the ability to fight, people don't have the ability to think, they don't love their own children. It's only Israelis and Americans that love their children. It's racist, it's supremacist, and it's Disney World.
No doubt. Now, just one final component about that, we'll get to the Iran negotiations. Part of the negotiations was that Lebanon was included. Trump kind of made it. Actually, I've got more questions on this, actually. And then what happened was the Lebanese president, prime minister kind of got together with Marco Rubio and the Israelis and had a meeting in Washington, D.C. to try and kind of save the process. I mean, you got a lot of experience in this. What do you think's going on there?
Oh, I think they're trying to figure out cover. I think they're somehow trying to build up and prop up because they realize, I would not be surprised if the representatives of the Lebanese government left. And the first thing that's announced was, we've had discussions with all groups and all people on the ground. They agree to this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You've got this desperate effort by the West, by the United States in particular, because Trump's latest polls are lower than dirt. So this is about not just selling a deal. This is about marketing it to the United States. Republicans in the United States are desperate because they see their hold on both the House for sure and possibly the Senate collapsing. They see these ridiculous investigations and prosecutions moving forward. So the biggest aspect of these negotiations has to do with propaganda, has to do with publicity, has to do with how do you sell it. I mean, Trump is totally swallowed and lost. He jumped into this because for 5 minutes he had a rush and said, oh, I'm a badass. Let me go kill people and drop bombs. This is Venezuela. This is Cuba. This is the way we're going to deal with this. And jumped in. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoops. And he's got a Secretary of Defense who thinks this is a game board, who's an idiot, who's got nothing to do with international rule, international law, international negotiations, who's fired the top military leadership in the United States and the Pentagon. Day by day, a new one goes. And why? Because they're telling him he's crazy. Not in those words, but they're pulling back and saying, we can't do this. You've got an economy. Let's, from an objective standpoint, factor in what's happening in the United States. It's probably costing the United States $2 or $3 billion a day, at the very least. The United States is running short on munitions. It's funny to see Jared Kushner enter into a deal today and publicly admit it, that he's with a company that has just entered into a deal for drones with UAE. So, he's going to make his money. The Trumps are going to make their money. There's a lot of pressure. It's not just about the price of gasoline, because that paints the American body politic as this pecuniary, as interested only in money, interested only in that and not the bigger picture. You've got 80% of the Americans, maybe 70% of the Americans, that do not want to be engaged in war in the Middle East, let alone with Iran. There's no purpose, there's no meaning, there's no threat. We're tired of that. There's been 20 years this go around, more than 20 years of direct battle in Afghanistan, in Iraq, where we starved to death 500,000 children, where we were driven out of Afghanistan, very much like Vietnam. You've got a new draft law coming in December, where if you're 18 to 20, I think 4 or 5, you have to register, except Trump's kid will have bad bone spurs or something. So there's a lot going on here. And you've got a significant amount of the American body politic that's anti-war for real. That's opposed to it because they see what's happening and they don't want to be party to it. They see what Israeli Jews have been putting up with, embracing and furthering with Netanyahu genocide in Gaza. They see what's going on in Beirut in the south. They see the extension of this new yellow line to add to Golan and to add to half of Gaza, to add to the pogroms going on in the West Bank. So there is a significant body politic, especially young women and men in this country, that want nothing to do with this. So you've got the merger of resistance politically, the merger of the financial impact that's adverse, the reality that Trump is a lunatic, got advanced dementia, and a liar, and the fact that he's surrounded by idiots when dealing with Iran, 5,000-year-old Persian culture and history and tradition. Last time I checked, it hadn't invaded anyone for 300 years. So you can only sell this for so long. Trump is desperate right now to get out. No doubt about it. He's gotten the maximum deflection he can get out of it. He's losing every day. More and more people are saying this is insane. And more people every day understand that he's on his knees in front of Netanyahu. And what Netanyahu says goes. What did Netanyahu go to the particular room he went to, which is a top secret room? Why was he invited? Why has Netanyahu been in Washington more times than he's been probably in Quds in the last 6 months? This is Netanyahu saying, this is my dream of 40 years. I've been waiting for this for 40 years. Well, we know what's happened before over those 40 years. We know what ended up happening in the south of Lebanon. It's going to happen again. And it will happen in Gaza. And it's going to happen in the West Bank. And it's happening in Syria. And, Netanyahu's view is let's just add a new Golan. So there's this combination of all these factors, these political factors, these economic factors. The fact that I'm surprised, but most of Europe and most of the West has refused to embrace it, has actually fought against it. The United Nations is starting to talk, although, the United Nations raves every day and everyone laughs at them.
No doubt. Now, I've got quite a lot of questions for you based on what you just said. You mentioned the draft. I know this is a smaller question, but obviously we know the history of someone like Muhammad Ali kind of refusing to go into Vietnam and go into prison. How, other than saying you've got medical conditions, if someone was to refuse in the United States of America, what would happen? They'd have to go to jail, or do you think there'd be civil unrest, or what? From a legal point of view, first of all, what would happen? What would be their situation?
Well, I was one of those people, and as a young 18-year-old, which is a lifetime ago, or 19-year-old who refused to report.
Only a few years ago.
Yeah, right. Who refused to report for my physical. I was when the draft had been resurrected, I was in the number 10 of 1 through 365 or whatever it was. I had many brothers at that time that went to prison. I had many that engaged in armed struggle within the United States. I had many that left the country. It remains to be seen. Once again, you see, the end of Vietnam was triggered when the sons and daughters of the ruling class started getting drafted and dying. People didn't care as long as the issue was not about the genocide. What ended up, besides the struggle in the streets and the resistance, was when the sons and daughters of the wealthy started coming home in body bags. People didn't care as long as they were black. as long as they were poor, as long as they were brown, as long as they were from rural America. But when it started hitting the sons and daughters of Wall Street, that's what changed it. So what will happen when this so-called draft comes in? There's going to be challenges over the legitimacy of it. There's going to be a challenge over what can be done. The war over whether it's going to be part of the federal criminal statute will begin. There'll be tremendous litigation over it. Who knows, given what the makeup of Congress will be at that time, whether they will support it or not. Again, I'm sure that Trump's 19-year-old son will have bone spurs and get exempted from it. And the other issue here, and it's an interesting paradox, those who have to sign up are both women and men, boys and girls. And it's interesting, at the very time that we're trying to purge the military of women and of queers and of different kinds of cultural histories, that we're now saying on the flip side, you have to come and serve. So this contradiction, this conflict is going to explode one way or another. Is there a chance of prosecutions? Yes. Is there a chance of mass resistance? Yes. To some degree, it depends upon whether you are putting people in a draft to simply have them on hold for quote unquote national emergencies, or whether you're putting people on draft to put them in the reserves, or whether you're putting them to register for a draft to go overseas, where there's now a third destroyer. And, who knows how many billions of dollars are going down the tube every day. And now Trump's threatening I'm going to bomb and destroy and kill speedboats. Great. Here we go. Venezuela again.
Yeah.
There's enough resistance growing. There's enough pushback. There's enough dissatisfaction on every level with everything this maniac is doing. It's doomed to fail.
But the question is, what's it? And we have this conversation regularly. Is he going to go do a ground invasion or not?
I doubt it. Listen, he can talk about the magic of a third term. He can talk about that all he wants to do. He's desperately hanging on to a Republican-controlled House and Senate, which he's going to lose the House for sure and possibly the Senate. Yeah. If he loses the Senate and he really flips out and crosses the line into ground troops, even if it's on the island off the coast of Iran, there is a chance he's not only going to get impeached, there's a chance he can get convicted and removed. And let's not forget, although the Supreme Court gave him enormous immunity for acts carried out in the course of his responsibility, and there's little language or distinction between lawful acts and unlawful acts, he's going to be out of office one way or another fairly soon, and accountability can rise down the road.
Well, not if he gives himself presidential immunity and all his family members and friends.
Well, he can do that, but he can't give immunity for violations of state laws. He's tried and he can't do that. He can give himself and all of his friends immunity from federal prosecutions, and he can give pardons and he can commute sentences, but he has no control to do that over prosecution for violations of state law by either himself or by others that are working in the conspiracy with him.
In terms of impeachment, what would be the legalistic process of either impeachment and one other conversations are about the 25th Amendment?
I don't count on the 25th Amendment. The problem is that the 25th Amendment requires a majority of his cabinet and the vice president. Yeah, there's a procedure. It's been debated that Congress can do it independently. They don't have the votes for that. The problem is, if you're in the cabinet and if you're getting kickbacks, and if you're involved in dirt and you're in violation of international and domestic law yourself, and you can't get immunity from the Supreme Court decision, the last thing in the world you want to take away is Looney Tunes, the one who will give you the pardon.
Yeah.
So there, one by one, he's dropped some of the cabinet members and he'll drop a few more. One by one, they're disappearing, but he's not going to get a 25th Amendment pulled out of this cabinet. You've got a cabinet of corruption. You've got a cabinet of ignorance. You've got a cabinet of people way in over their head. You've got a cabinet of people who are thinking about what happens when Trump is gone or dead, or in a Looney Tunes. What am I going to do with my own exposure? You've got a cabinet that's involved with corruption and kickbacks. That's a problem. In terms of impeachment, I have no doubt that he will be impeached after the Democrats take the House. I would not be surprised if a bill was not passed or a vote was not pushed the very first day of the new Congress impeaching him. He'll be impeached, but unless there's a nightmare. Lightning strikes bolts, and the Senate is recast dramatically. He will not be convicted.
Yeah, because you need 2/3 majority, right, in the Senate, which is not going to happen. Okay, now coming back to the main. Sorry, just one last question about the Lebanon situation. So right now you have it where Lebanon isn't in a ceasefire. They are bombing Lebanon. They've been bombing Lebanon every single day. But Hezbollah has been responding the last 2 days and causing many, many blows. And so you've basically got it where there isn't one, but then Trump announces a 3-week extension, and we're seeing the Israelis try and occupy more land, but kind of failing to do so. How do you see that resolving from your perspective?
Well, it's become more and more apparent day by day, both by action, by anonymous sources, by public statements, that Netanyahu has been pulling the chain. The one thing that drives Donald Trump more than anything else is he's a legend in his own mind, and everyone else has to bow down to him. He's being embarrassed. The truth is coming out about him. Netanyahu is a puppeteer and is pulling the strings up and down, up and down, up and down. It's going to reach a point where Trump is going to have to say to Netanyahu, no, and no in a firm way, in a direct way, in a way that says, if you violate this, there's a story from years and years and years ago, which has been written about Baker when he was the Secretary of State for Bush, where I guess it was the Gulf War, where he met with, I forget who the Israeli prime minister was, and had a meeting with him and said, look, we're going to attack. We're going to be on the offensive. It's obvious that Iraq or other nations may shoot missiles back into Israel. We're trying to build a coalition among the Arab states with regard to the Gulf War. If you get involved in an exchange of weapons and missiles and rockets, it could destroy it. Please don't. And the Israeli prime minister said, I can't do that. I can't sit back while rockets are landing in Israel and not respond, both for our safety and for the politics of our existence. And Baker said, okay. He said, thank you, and got up and walked out the door. Before he left the door, he took a check out of his pocket. He ripped it up and threw it on the ground. And he told him, I think it was Begin, I'm not sure. He said, let me know when you want the money to start flowing again. And lo and behold, Israel didn't fire any rockets or missiles back. And that's eventually the purse string control. Not only is it money, but day by day, support for Israel is going through the basement and into the devil's sanctuary. They have less support in this country than ever before, including among Jews, in particular, young Jews. So when Trump finally says, you're embarrassing me, I've got too many problems, I've got to count my socks, I've got to build a new mausoleum for me, I've got a swimming pool I've got to take care of, you've got to stop. If Netanyahu says I can't, the money's going to stop. And at this point, AIPAC can't do anything about it. Jonathan Greenblatt can't do anything about it. ADL can't do anything about it. And the Zionists of America can't do anything about it. It's going to happen sooner or later. And with Netanyahu, look, it's amazing that when does it reach a point that an ounce of humanity, of decency, of human rights, of affinity for international law hits Israeli Jews? Maybe 5% at this point, maybe 10% at this point. If and when they're left out there hanging, the Kahanists, without the shekels coming from the United States or other parts of the world, the West, whether it's the UK, whether it's Germany, wherever it's coming from, it's going to change the body politic on the ground and quickly. So it's going to reach a point where Netanyahu is going to have to make a decision. Is he going to go it alone? And he loves to talk about how we can go it alone. He can barely go it alone to the bathroom these days. So the notion of Israel continuing its war of genocide in Palestine, in Lebanon, what it's doing in Iran, what it's been doing in Syria, in and of itself, without shekels coming from the United States and West, is nonsense. Netanyahu will be back in the prisoner's dock, and it'll be off to the jail.
No doubt. Now, coming to the negotiations, there's a few key elements of the negotiations. The first element is the more complex aspect of the Strait of Hormuz. But just before we talk about the straight removes, I want to talk to you about the sanctions relief. Now, the sanctions relief, I'm told that this can't happen without congressional approval. And even if Trump was to agree to it, he wouldn't get congressional approval, or it'll be very difficult for him to get. I mean, what's your understand? Well, explain to us how it works with the sanctions relief.
Trump will say, fuck you to Congress. Trump will do what he wants to do. Trump has enough ability. He will say national security. He will trigger the discretion that the president has when it comes to international affairs and national security. Of course, he's going to, Congress may rebel, but with the Senate still in control of Republicans and before the House turns over, there's not going to be any real pushback. Trump has issued 1,000 executive orders. Many, many, many of them have been reversed by the courts. This is one, if he can argue this is a way to end the fighting, this is a way to bring the Navy back, this is a way to begin to move forward in peace and with justice and giving the protection that our colleague Israel is entitled to and the free passage of the Strait. Yes, there'll be litigation. Yes, there'll be challenge, but he can do it and he will do it. And maybe 6 months down the road, it'll be reversed. But I don't see a court of appeals, let alone the Supreme Court, freezing the sanctions, freezing his executive authority, as he says, in the interim. He will claim emergency powers. It's what he's done before. Today it's interesting. The first day he came into office, he reversed a law, and been around for quite a while, that permitted refugees seeking asylum on the grounds of the Convention Against Torture or refugee status to cross the border to make the application, to come literally into the United States, not to cross the river, but to come through checkpoints they were permitted to come in. And they had to report, and the conditions were set. He said no from the first day. A year later, the D.C. Court of Appeals today said it's unconstitutional and reinstated it. Now, the Supreme Court may reverse it, but it's one of many, 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 many. The tariffs, another recent example. There's some other cases that are pending right now where he exercised executive authority, and it took quite a while to overturn it. So if he needs to release X amount of dollars at any point or put X amount of dollars into an escrow account, it's not going to be up to Congress to be able to stop him. He's going to do it.
Okay, but isn't that a problem for Iran from sanctions relief perspective? Because if hypothetically Trump did basically pursue an executive order, release the sanctions of Iran, and then they were overturned either through the legal system or through Congress, then this is a problem for Iran, and this is why Iran needs assurances that something like that won't happen.
Well, we know
from American history that if you remember the sanction relief that happened after the hostage situation, the Americans just put the sanctions back on a few years later. So I guess how can we ensure that doesn't happen from Iran's perspective?
We're back to the escrow account. We're back to money being put into an escrow account with certain terms and conditions agreed to. And if I was the president and I was putting $50 billion, $100 billion, $200 billion into an escrow account, one of the terms and conditions of the escrow account is, this is the escrow account. As long as you do X, you get the money. I can't change my mind. It can't be overturned. And even should it be overturned, it's underway. That's what the escrow accounts are about. That's one way you can guarantee it. Now, he's really going to get a lot of hell for doing that. But again, I could write his speech for him. My fellow countrymen and women. Now, not women. My fellow straight white Christians and Jews. I must find peace. Today I've gone back to that Obama who wasn't even born in the United States. That Muslim maniac. I've gone back to his agreement. I'm releasing the $200 billion or $100 billion. It's going into an escrow account. It'll be paid over a period of time, but in response, there'll be an independent board that will make sure Iran is in compliance. And as long as Iran is in compliance, as Americans, as the greatest country in the history of the world, we have to prove our nettle. That's what he's going to do. And that's what he could do. And again, that's why this notion of the escrow account controlled by third parties, third countries under international law is the only way it could really proceed, because you've just hit it on the head, because he's a liar, because he's crazy, because he changes his mind, because the politics of Congress could change overnight. Although when it comes to the sanctions, keep in mind, Congress supported the discharge of the sanctions before. There's no reason to believe they're going to reverse it. The Republicans are not going to do that. Now, of course, Trump will turn around and say how it's different than what Obama did. He'll
Yours
say,
might be better.
oh, it's much better. It builds in safety nets. It builds in guarantees. It's a tighter control. The reason I had to walk away from it is because this is where we're at. Well, you're the one who ripped it up. This is where we're at. So there are ways you could work with it.
So one of the things about negotiations, obviously you're a lawyer, and many people say, look, in negotiations, you got to give up a bit to get a bit. In this perspective, I mean, if you were Iran, yes, you've won the war, but then you don't want this to continue. You want your sovereignty. You want all those things to happen. How much leeway would you have in terms of some of the things you would give to the United States of America? And actually, let's talk about this in an individual level. So in nuclear enrichment, Iran says it's their sovereign right to enrich uranium. They will need it for domestic purposes. They've never tried to get the bomb. The U.S. say they want them to have 0% enrichment. Well, I guess that's really Israel. The U.S. is always, up until Trump, being pretty okay with a few percent. Something like that. How could you get to agreement where you can placate the Israelis and still get a deal?
All right, you got a deal. Israel, you give up your nukes. We'll stop going after the nukes. Let's see where it's at. Let's, we're afraid of you. You're afraid of us. Keep in mind, Iran has been making nuclear weapons since 1732. I mean, every week, every month for 40 years now, the nukes are here. It's the WMDs of Iraq. It's nonsense. Americans know it. Iran has an absolute right to use nuclear development for their energy resources. Again, you could build in escrow accounts that you can bring third-party nations, United Nations, scientists to come in and to examine to make sure. There are times and places, and if you refuse entry, if you're in violation, the escrow account gets frozen. So there are ways to control it, but ultimately, Israel is the block here, because Israel wants a complete 100% guarantee. If I'm Iran, am I going to turn around when faced with 100 years of Israeli genocide, with what Israel's done in Gaza, what it's done in the West Bank, what it's done in Syria, what it's done in Lebanon for 25, 30 years, what it's done to us repeatedly? Am I going to turn around and simply say, okay, we're going to allow you to dictate what weapons we can use or not for self-defense? We're going to allow you to dictate what alternative energy means we can develop? I wouldn't. But again, you can build in a system of checks and balance. My understanding, and I haven't done a deep dive, was under the Obama agreement, there was a protocol that was set up that outside sources were able to examine what was going on. And not once was there any claim that anything was being done towards the development of a nuclear weapon. I get it. The only one who's allowed in that direct region to get a nuclear weapon and keep a nuclear weapon is the country that's been indicted for genocide, is the country that has stolen countless lands, that has murdered, crippled, raped, and robbed millions of people in the region. They're safe. The country that's led by another lunatic, Netanyahu, who is a fugitive and under indictment and wanted for war crimes and genocide, he should have the discretion to use an atomic weapon. But Iran, last time I checked, hasn't invaded anyone for 300 years, cannot develop nuclear energy for their own resources. Keep in mind, with Israel attacking electrical systems, with Israel and the United States threatening to shut down the fundamental structure of Iran, the alternative of the nuclear energy system provides a safeguard. It's a safety net. Israel's going to continue to say we can't believe them, we can't trust them, no matter what. And we're going to hear the same thing on and on and on. Nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons. Where's the evidence? You can talk about it all day long.
This might be a repeat question, but you mentioned that America could freeze the account if Iran doesn't oblige. We know from what we've seen now, there's no such thing as international law. There's no such thing as rules. It's basically the wild, wild west. And so in reality, if U.S. randomly decides to freeze those accounts and just makes an excuse that Iran isn't complying, won't we have an issue?
No, I didn't say, I may have misspoken or you may have misunderstood. I'm not saying that the United States has the ability to freeze the accounts. This independent body is the one. The United States could make an application like to the International Court of Justice or to another court set up specifically for this purpose, which is comprised of independent judges from a variety of countries, and make the argument they violated, they've done this. or Iran could do that, with the understanding that that would be a final decision as long as it was in compliance with international law. The problem with the ICJ is it has no enforcement mechanism. The problem with the ICJ, unless the United Nations sets up a tribunal, there's nothing to put some handcuffs on someone. And the problem with the ICC, even though there are arrest warrants, the way it's structured under the Rome Statute, it's amazing. The United Nations should require everyone who belongs to the United Nations to be a signatory to the ICC, but they're not. So there is a capacity for an independent body to be set up, overseen by independent jurists, that they are the ones that could say violation frozen, fix it and move it back. The United States or Iran could seek an emergency stay or interlocutory relief right away, seek an injunctive application. That's the way you go. You've got to take it out of the traditional sphere where Donald Trump could say, oops, no. Or if you're Donald Trump and need to talk to America, where the leadership of Iran could say, oops, no. Now, you're right. The problem is it is dependent, the escrow system account is dependent on the independence, the goodwill, and good faith of other individuals and of other states. And there's a problem because it's difficult to see these days.
True. Now, we've seen now that there's possibilities of conversations, that there could be further negotiations. What we heard in the last negotiations was Iran had actually shifted quite a bit, and they were willing, and some felt like they'd conceded too much in these negotiations, but they were willing to be very open-minded in these discussions. Apparently they were very close to a deal, and then Netanyahu got on a phone call with Kushner and killed it. Now, once you know that's happening, as someone who would be advising someone like Hezbollah or Iran, would you then be saying, look, let's go to other negotiations, or would you be saying this is a waste of time? How would you handle that situation where something looked like it was going to bear some fruit, but then you know it's never going to get there? And then with the added complication that these negotiations sometimes are used in order to carry out a surprise attack.
I said to a client today, a line that I've used over the years, and in fact, I used the line with Ahmed Yassin many years ago before he was murdered by Israel. It's a Bob Dylan line. You got to know the difference between what you want and what you need. Okay? All the sides involved in this want certain things. All right? And it's not up to an advisor or a lawyer to instruct, to advise, or to tell the client, this is what you need. Iran knows what it needs. Trump knows what he needs besides a straitjacket. Netanyahu knows what he needs, which is a get out of jail card free. Hezbollah knows what it needs, and that's self-determination and Israel out of the South again. So in negotiations, whether I'm negotiating with the government on a criminal case, whether I'm serving as an advisor in an international issue involving negotiations, I always start out by saying, you got to know the difference between what you want and what you need. What is it you must walk away with at the end? Yes, there's nothing wrong with holding out for what you want, and day by day, chip by chip, point by point, walking away from it. There has to be a red line. You know you can't go beyond the red line. Now, the obvious here is, now, the Straits is an enormous issue.
Yeah.
Enormous. And, brilliant Donald Trump and the West that's been, harking and barking and screaming about Iran forever didn't stop to think about it. But even the Straits is an interesting issue because, once again, it's an example about how international law, when it's self-serving and convenient, can swallow the law of the sea. Under the law of the sea, both Iran and Oman, because it's within 12 miles of each coast, control it. But yet the United Nations comes along and says, no, it's international waters, so everyone's going to sign off on it. Let's go. Would someone like an Iranian boat to come off the west coast come off the coast of New York City? I don't think so. I think it would be shot out of the water. So the Strait is probably the most important playing card here of any. That's the one that Donald Trump wants to walk away with. That's why every day he goes, oh, the Strait's open, the boats are going through, the oil price is dropping, and the economy's wonderful. So Iran's got that. Iran understands the international economics. the impact on fuel and on food, on farming, on supplies, the pressure on other European countries. Israel wants to survive. What Donald Trump has is the shekel pad. He's got the checkbook. We'll see how far he lets Netanyahu pull him around with the dog collar on. So when you're involved, you have to know the difference between what you want and what you need. When you get to the point of need, this is what I need, and this is where I'm going to go. I may want more, but I've got to be willing step by step to give on that. I'm involved in negotiations on a very serious criminal case in the United States. And I'm playing super hardball. And I've been playing it for a while, but in the back of my mind, I know what my client's going to settle for. And eventually we're going to settle for it. But meanwhile, we're going to negotiate and chip away and win some and lose some. As Mr. Kushner says, it's business. So bring along your duffel bags, fill it with your shekels and with your money from the UAE. I mean, what's explosive right now is the UAE is asking Trump to invest who knows how many hundreds of billions of dollars in their economy. Interesting, because I guess it's time to pay Kushner some money. So they want to put pressure on Trump to raid the U.S. economy, to give money to the UAE so they can keep up with Kushner. It's this corrupt business dealing that's pervasive in the Gulf.
Well, actually, we already know that they're already financially funded and put money into Trump's crypto project.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is like money laundering in essence, right? In effect. But so Stanley, one last question. What's your thoughts about, do you think these negotiations can succeed? I mean, you've been in so many, you've been advising people like Hezbollah, Hamas, various other people. Can there be a deal? You're dealing with a guy who wrote the book on the art of the deal. And then you've got Iran. Can it be done?
Well, the book of the art of a deal is fiction. Trump's art of the deal is to steal, 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 don't pay, go bankrupt, pay kickbacks, sue people. I mean, there have been thousands of lawsuits. His foundation was closed. His university was closed. He owes $300 billion or whatever the hell it is to New York State. He's been indicted and convicted of 34 counts. His company was convicted in New York State. The art of the deal is the Roy Cohen art of the deal. Steal, lie, cheat, steal, lie, cheat, and leverage. Do I think there's going to be a deal? Yes, I do. I think that there's enough pushback developing in Congress right now as we go closer to the elections. There's enough pushback by the American body politic. There's enough beginning pushback from Europe at this point. People are so, the image of Israel as the victim, which floated for a generation or two, is gone. The world understands, yes, there are still the Zionist entities and the groups that put people in prison for saying from the river to the sea. The notion of Israel as a perpetual victim has finally been understood to be a perpetual lie. And that's gone. So there are outside controls, outside influence, outside leverage right now. Do I think there's going to be a deal? There's going to be a deal. Trump's idea of a deal is just to move on and declare victory. What's really important is the commas, the semicolons, the nuts and bolts. And that's why I do believe, whether it's publicized or not, there's going to be some component of an escrow account here.
Great. Let's hope you're right. Let's hope there's a deal. Let's hope Iran gets to join the world in terms of having sanction relief, having an economy, and will becoming probably moving towards one of the greatest global powers in current times. But Stanley, always appreciate you coming on. We definitely need to get you back. I'm reading the chat and they're all loving you. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know people can follow you on your X. I will put it in the nest as Stanley Cohen Law. And so everyone should be following your X account. But where else can people find you and follow you?
That's the only. I don't think I've updated my website in 10 years. I haven't had a lot of time for writing. I did a lot of writing for Counterbunch and Al Jazeera. I'm just buried with stuff. I'll tell you a strange symmetry. There is a symmetry in life. I recently won a case in Germany. The symmetry, the paradox of an anti-Zionist, anarchist Jewish lawyer who beat the German federal police on behalf of a world-famous Islamic scholar that had been banned from Europe and Germany caved, is what it's about.
That's a major W. Don't mess with Stanley Cohen.
Well,
Don't mess.
It's about, I tell people, and I'll, besides up the rebels, I'll part with what I say often, especially to young lawyers. We live, we fight, and we die. And in between, if we give much more than we take, it's been a good journey.
Totally agree with that. Great comment and great food for thought. Appreciate you taking your time out, Stanley. Definitely get you back on again.
Thanks so very much. And up the rebels to your wonderful audience.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was Stanley Cohen. What a legend. What a legend. Much love to him. Really appreciate him. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Put it in the main section. This video, as you know, is going to go on the Moral Resistance channel. So make sure you watch it again there. Boost it. Like it. Comment on it. Comment on the main section. And push it to your friends and family. I thought that was an awesome interview. Where else can you listen to the lawyer of Hamas and Hezbollah smashing the United States of America and Israel, taking the Zionist regime to account? Then this channel, then with us. This is why we love Stanley Cohen. This is why we love you all. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And subscribe, subscribe, subscribe.